Hey kids, and welcome to the leg butt episode of Stylish Rumble Harmony Tutorial Rigging Guide for the noob type stuff people. So this episode turned out to be so much longer and less organized than I thought. Legs are really tedious and a lot of it is guessing and checking and kind of finicky stuff. So I fast forwarded through a lot of the repetitious stuff and I cut out as much yawning and stuff as I could, and I managed to condense it down into 40 minutes. So I broke it up into two parts. So the first part is the legs and the knees and getting that stuff working, getting all the pieces into place and making sure that the pelvis is rotating around. So towards the end I get into the actual pelvis rotation part, but that's a lot like the face part if you've gone through that already. It's a very similar way to do it. And then in the next video, part 2 is just going about patching the hip joint. So if that's all you're here for, if you're like, oh, I want to figure out how to patch up my hip joints, just pop over to video 2 and just skip this because it's very dry and I'm so sorry. I don't know how to make it more interesting or streamlined. Maybe if I get better at this, I'll re-record it. It is what it is. Rigging is boring. I'm trying to make it less boring, but it's still kind of boring. Alright, so let's go. You know, like all things in Harmony, there's varying levels of complexity we can get into with the legs. I've pre-rigged these legs because the more into realistic and curvy and stylized that something gets, that's what starts adding problems. A lot of television shows do this. Boop. All the girl characters wear skirts because then there's no hips to worry about. That's super easy. You also get these guys where you've got your little leg and then you've got like an egg body. This, I mean, you just put pivot points. Yeah, you can put a curved deformer in there if you want to, or you can tween it. It's pretty simple to figure out that sort of stuff. It's once you start getting these curves, forks, stuff like that, once you need to get a little bit of a fancy leg going, that's when people start having trouble. I pre-rigged this side because these are the more difficult ones. These boy legs where it's like straight at the hip and then straight at the knee, those are super simple relative to this sort of thing. Like this area needs a little bit of care, but these curvy butts, that's when things get difficult. And I've done a little walk cycle using this leg so you can see you can get a little bit of curve out of the hips. And this front fork isn't looking distracting. You probably won't be able to do a completely cut out realistic hip without adding in a lot of stuff that needs finicky work, like changing patches and stuff like that. But with a relatively straightforward situation, you can get a fork that looks like this. No one's going to be looking at that if the characters are doing other stuff. And now, one of these legs is done with drawing substitutions, and one of them is done with deformers. So you can, if you're watching carefully, you can see where this seam pops because it's the one done with drawing substitutions. And I haven't put in enough so that it is ultra smooth. This side here has envelope deformers. Oop. So both the upper leg and lower leg have an envelope deformer going all the way around. And instead of using drawing substitutions like I did on the face, it's actually doing the entire outline and doing that. I've also done the hips with an envelope deformer on this one instead of drawing substitutions. You can see that the butt is actually part of the pelvis and the line is just being stretched down. The pelvis itself looks like this. The fork of the pants here have their own element that's being squashed and stretched along the way. The zipper's on its own element. The pockets. See, so you can actually see I'm using a cutter to make sure that these pockets are staying inside of the pelvis without having to hand animate it or erase anything. So I've also thrown this pants in and I'm going to rig that so you can see some of the stuff that goes into here. I've got a copy of the rig. Boop, boop. And I just created an identical copy because I knew it's going to have all the same pieces. The leg is in 2 pieces, upper leg, lower leg, and we've got each of the pockets have their own layer. Sometimes you can get away with having the front pocket and the back pocket sharing drawing, and then just switching because the front and the back pocket are never visible at the same time. But you definitely want left from right separated. The zip and the fork are separated, and the belt and the buckle. So basically, if it's a piece, give it a drawing, give it a peg, and you're going to be able to get more flexibility out of it for getting different views. A lot of baby riggers just don't break things up enough because they feel like, oh, like, calm down. But don't calm down. Break up everything. Put everything in its own drawing. Earrings, put that on its own layer. Yeah, who cares? Just more layers. And it's more to keep track of, but you're gonna get more out of it. I'm gonna start with the front just like I did with the head because this is where I like my 0 to be. So I'm going to just fast forwardly copy all the pieces into their respective position. Alright, so all my front view stuff has been pasted in, and I've cut things in a relatively sensible way. When I first get my art, I'll of course save my designer art into a subfolder and lock it and hide it for myself because I'm an idiot. And I'll take my rigger art that I create and I'll go around and try and figure out where I want these pivot points to be. These knees are crazy high, so it's not 100% accurate. When I was cutting this pelvis up, I was thinking about where this would actually come out here, and I think I actually want to raise those dots up now once I've seen that. So I'll grab these here and I'll move them out and think about where the pivot point should be here, like where I actually want the crease to be. I would probably want a little bit more on this side than I had. And then I'd turn to the next view and I'd just think about where I want my leg to actually come out. And I want it, because of this fork, and I don't want to do too much work, I might put it just this high because I think I could get away with that and it'll work fine. And then the butt, so I'll turn off current drawing on top, view show current drawing on top, and then I can put my rough over the top of my art. And I've kept these circles on the overlay so they're a little easier to manipulate, and I will move them into place. And it's good to remember that the back leg may not be in the same position as the front leg on these 3/4 views. It really depends. If we put this here, because this is where it's going to rotate from, that actually looks okay. So you might want to put the back one just maybe a little tad higher than the front one. The side leg is a little bit tricky. So we have a choice. We can move this down farther so that this leg seamlessly connects, because this is the width of the leg, this circle. So if we put it here, we're going to always have this little bump in the butt. Or what we can do, if we put up a little higher, so this part works a little better, we might need to adjust our butt a little bit. That's an okay thing to do. You can also make your leg have part of a butt on it. So if you do decide you want it to be totally seamless, you don't want any effort at all to clean up that seam, you can do this and then add some butt to your leg and it'll just rotate out from that point. So it's one of those things that you just might want to play around with a little bit. Just make like a little side butt like this and then play around and see what making it higher, what kind of problems that cause, what making it lower will solve, and choose what you think is the best decision. Because there's no right answer. Can't emphasize that enough. You have something that some animators might really like, and you have something that some animators will just detest you for, and there's no way to know until it's done. Now the back butt, this butt's a little bit smaller. This butt's a little bit smaller, so we can probably just get away with having the leg connect right about there, and it won't be too much of an issue. Special poses like sitting or something might need special drawings, but that's always the case in 2D. And it's also good to remember that the inside curve and the outside curve can be different, because for these lady legs, I did have to use a different curve on the inside and outside. So here, this is what the inside leg is, and this is where the outside leg is. Find the 3/4 back view, that's finished. So when I rotate this way, this leg cleans up, and this butt, we have the option of a butt overlay that we can have, or making some sort of an underlay butt cheek that reveals itself as this leg is turned out. So once we've got all our circles laid out and our best guess, next I'll do my pivot points. And once I get to these leg pivot points, I've got a good idea of where they need to be. And these circles are not always 100% because they are just best guesses. The knees are probably pretty safe, but the hips sometimes need a little bit of adjusting once things happen. But it's probably going to be closer than if you just guess an arbitrary point and go by that. Next, we're going to start at the top peg, and just like in the video for the face, I'm just going to go around and animate my pivot points with empty drawings. I'm going to set my keyframe this time because I didn't do that last time. And then I'm going to go around and animate my pivot points into place as the rig rotates around. Alright, so now we're at the leg part. So what I'm going to do is take all of these circles, and if you have a foot that's a little bit more finicky, like these ankles are tapered, you're going to want to put circles on the ankles as well, because when it goes from here to here, the ankle's not lined up. Now what I'm going to do is extend my exposure, these leg circles, throughout all the frames that I have my legs going. Got all the circles in, we go to each frame, and then make sure all of our stuff is lining up. So we start at the top, we leave the Z key until we need to move things from the front to the back, which is something I'm going to do during the rigging process. But this pivot point process, I'll just make sure that the top pivot is lined up here, then it goes down to the knee, and then the lower leg as well. Another tedious stage. And on this leg, because we need to move that pivot point down so low, we might need a drawing substitution just because our circles are getting squished. So if you happen to notice that I've got a blue circles and I've got white circles, that's just so I can make sure that the correct leg is going into the correct place. Because this same leg, the right leg is always going to be the right leg, and the left leg is always going to be the left leg, even if they're rotating around each other. Oh, and one more thing is you don't, aside from stretching it, like squishing it vertically, you always rotate into place. You don't skew. So here, if this knee was off, I would not skew it like this into place. I would rotate it into place using the hip so that that point lines up. Then I'd stretch it if I needed to, and then rotate the lower leg if I needed to. Right, so I finally got all my circles done. I'll deactivate my art, and this is what you should end up with. It's just some circles rotating around each other. And just so you know, I'm 45 minutes in at this point, including all the talking and stuff I've been doing. So it's not a fast process. I'm gonna speed through a bunch of it because it's really boring to watch. I don't feel like you need to watch a 6-hour rig to be able to create a 6-hour rig. But when I first started rigging, the first show I ever rigged on, I was just an intern. And this was back when Harmony was still pretty new, so it's not like there were tons of Harmony riggers dancing around. And the first rig I did took a full week. So if you are rigging up your first character, try not to get down on yourself if it does take you a really long time to do it. Depending on the complexity of the character, even in professional studios, some characters might take a week to rig just because they have so many expressions handling fancy clothes or stuff like that. Your first rig will definitely, like, don't be afraid to put some time into it, because it's more important that you actually learn how to do it properly than to get a rig banged out like ultra fast. And I'm just doing the nub patch. Hopefully you recognize this circle situation. And if not, you can go to the arms video, arms number 1. You can learn how to do that. So the first character I rigged took me a week, and by the end of that season, I was rigging about 5 characters a week. So each one would take a full day's work. It definitely took me a few months to get to that stage. You eventually pick up speed just because you do something so many times, you don't need to think about it, especially that cutter. The first time you use a cutter, you have to use your whole brain to get it working. So this upper leg, I'm going to do exactly what I've done with the nub patch, where I just put in my circle and make sure that the seams line up here pretty well. And this is going to sit behind the pelvis, and this is going to sit behind the pelvis, so that when our leg comes out, there's lines in there behind that will be able to be displayed. This pelvis may need its lines adjusted to make sure that it lines up with our new dealie. And I just turned off my light table, just right click, Shift L will also get it done. But L's so far away if you're a left-handed keyboardist, which I am. So now we've already got our front leg working. This part here, well, it's a little bit messed up. So if I pull that out and I'm not happy with the way that looks, this means my pivot point is too low. So the front part looks decent enough, but I think if that was higher, that would actually look better there as well. And the front view is a good one to start testing this stuff out with, because it's all set to 0. If you reset, it's going to go back to where it belongs. If I turn this one, and I decide I don't like it and then I reset it, you can see it's off the mark there because it's not actually set to 0 because it's been animated around, which you saw me do earlier. So if I decide after I've got this done already that I want my pivot point to be higher, I've still got my pivot point kicking around. You can leave it on while you're setting up your rig instead of deleting them out like I did. You can just select this part here, shift and up 2, and then move our pivot point, and let's see. That looks a little better. It's not perfect, but it never will be. And because we're only using one drawing, actually we do have 2 drawings on these because I've made my nubs, pre-made my nubs. Whatever you do to one, you do to the other. So you just, if you hit shift, and shift will move faster. So if you're just hitting over, it'll go very slowly. If you hit shift, it'll go faster. So you just keep track of how many times you do that, and then you can do it to the other side. And any drawing substitutions you happen to have made. And of course, if you have 2 drawings that are sharing that pivot point, you want to move both of them. Don't just move one and be like, oh, I forgot that guy. Alright, so test. I don't think you could get away with doing the splits without adjusting this sort of stuff, but that is there as well if they don't quite like the way, or it'd be even better to put in a drawing substitution here and get that working exactly how they want it to, but I think this is what it's probably the best we're gonna get for this front view. The next thing I'm going to do is start getting my pelvis working because I do the hip joints, like the knee joints work now. It's just a matter of changing drawing substitutions. So if I use all keyframes mode and I bend this leg, it's going to bend as it rotates and just work itself out. Don't think I'm going to need drawing substitutions for this rotation for these legs because they are just straight up and down. In this one, as I said, I did one side with the deformer. And what I would do with the lower leg is I'd go to this frame and I'd use my deformer to get the shape of this lower leg and then go to my next frame and adjust the shape, next frame. And then I just went all the way around and animated that leg into place. I believe it's this one, yeah. This one has the deformer. So it started in this position and then I'd move it here and I'd just, you can see it animated in and just go all the way around and animate that shape. On this leg, similar to the face, I just go to each view and then I'd paste in the leg if it didn't work. And I did put in a couple little in-betweens. So here it has a drawing because it went from this to this. So here's the first drawing, here's the first drawing. So I just put in a little in-between to kind of smooth that out. You might need 2 or 3, depending on how meticulous that show is going to be. But I mean, if you're working on a 2D show that needs this much rotation, like your character's standing on something that's rotating for some reason because they hate you, then I think it's worth putting in deformers so that you can get that ultra smooth work without doing a ton of drawings. But for most shows, you're not going to get a rotation that's more than 5 or 6 drawings long. Like, they tend to turn them pretty quick to save this trouble. And you can see that this drawing substitution side is working almost as well. Like, there's only that little part there that might pop a little bit, and one more drawing substitution could fill it in, so I don't think they're worth it unless your characters have to do really meticulous 3D stuff, but that's just me and my bitterness talking. So the lower legs are done. Next we're going to I'm going to go through and do my pelvis, and then the last thing I'm going to do is make sure all the hips are working and everything is on the right view. So I'll turn my art back on. So let's get this pelvis working, and then we can start working on patching up those hips. I'm going to extend my pelvis all the way along. Here's where we have the choice between drawing substitutions and using deformer. Because I use drawing substitutions in the face, I'll use a deformer here. But you could use the same principle that we did before, where you cut the pelvis in half, and then the 2 wings you're left with are more animatable than a straightforward pelvis is. And you can just add as many drawing substitutions as you need to get the different views. And now we can adjust it if we need to. Because it's so straight up and down, deformer might be a bit overkill. We want to key it as we go along. And you'll know how far down these lines go because they have to match up with these circles. And you may want to we may end up wanting to add drawing substitutions so that we could have no line on this side for their side view because the fork of the pants is there, and we've already got a drawing for that. That's something we can test as we go along and as we go around, because I didn't do the 360 version. I just did a 180 for the head. This side is going to stay that side when it comes around. We're not actually going to flip drawing of the pelvis at all because it's just acting as a contour line, and contours don't exist in real life, so you don't actually have to flip it. Just carry on doing what you're doing. This one you could probably get away with resetting it. Apparently my rotation is not lined up very accurately. So that's another step you might want to add at the beginning, just making sure that your character's rotating around exactly the point you want it to rotate around. But I can't be bothered. Now our pelvis is working if we deactivate our art. Okay, so now we check, and for the most part, I mean, it's already looking all right. If I use Alt keyframes mode. And remember, once you've got this stuff rotated around, you have to undo your move. You can't reset because this has animation on it. Do the same thing for your zip and your fork. Your art, you may need to turn off your legs and pelvis so you can actually see. Alright, so now I got all my bits in here. I've already set up my template so that the color art, or I've got it auto patch because I don't want the line art involved, and I am using the line tool. So I've just got an auto patch here, and then the bum that is cutting all these pockets. So that just means that any pockets that leave the pelvis are not going to get shown. So I can move this in and out like that, and I can get an easier rotation, a little bit less work. Now that I've put in my forks, I've decided that I do want my pelvis to be able to be broken up a little bit more. So I'm going to add in some side drawing substitutions. Drawing 2, I'm going to just get rid of this line, and on drawing 3, I'm going to get rid of the line that's going under the fork. And that'll clean that up a little bit. Lastly, the belt. Isn't rigging fun? You get to do tedious, ultra tedious stuff. Hopefully all this tedium, if nothing else, is teaching you that if you're new to the program, making a simpler character is going to save you a lot of a headache. If you're rigging, especially doing cheats like putting skirts on characters or hiding wherever there's a seam, using a belt to hide this seam between this and the shirt. If the person has their shirt tucked in. So now we've got our belt working. Now when I squish this down, the line weight changes quite a bit from here to here. That might be something you want to fix. So you'd have to add in a drawing substitution and then try and unsquish it. It might be easier to go into the drawing view and separate these lines. Front half's done. Now we need the back half of the pelvis. Any art back here, so we've got a bum and some pockets. And the bum might even need to be 2 layers too, like 1 for each cheek. It depends how much detail you're getting into as you're animating. Now we've got all our pieces in, and it's looking a little bit jacked up. The first thing we're going to do is change the Z-axis on these guys. When people start doing this Z-axis stuff, moving things to the back, find that the urge is to bring the near leg forward. So here, this leg needs to be in front now because it's been rotated, and this one needs to go in the back. So most often people will bring it forward like that, and then try and fix this. What I like to do instead is bring this leg back like that, and then none of our patches are immediately destroyed. This leg is still working pretty good, but the leg we need to be in the back has now gone to the back. So here, this one needs to go in the back, and this pivot point's way off because I just put in this Z peg. So now what I'm going to do is make sure that these are set to stop motion, which they are, and that the correct leg is staying in the front the whole time as it goes around. The next thing to do is to patch up the hips. So I've already been recording for an hour and a half. Doing the legs is a bit of a tedious task, so I'm going to break this up into 2 videos so that you wouldn't have to dredge through this. I'm not sure exactly how long these videos are going to be, but it might just be easier to find things if it's broken up into 2. Yeah, so I'm going to cut now, and I'll be right back in the next video, which I'm going to post on the same day, ideally, if everything goes well. So, but like and subscribe in the meantime. Bye.